First and foremost, I'm a doctor, I'm a physician, not just by training, but by vocation. So very motivated by, patient impact and driving improved outcomes for patients globally. So that's really the inspiration. What I do is I'm one of the co-founders and managing directors at Veda Ventures, and we're a group that is focused on translating new science, cutting-edge science, into new medicines, for patients globally. And we do that by working with scientists, academics, physicians, entrepreneurs, and financiers to make those medicines a reality globally. So we're based here in the US, but we create companies and invest in companies sitting here in the US, in Asia, and in Europe. We have about 33 companies that we've either created, put together, or invested in. And the cumulative pipeline of those 33 companies is in excess of 100 medicines that they're developing and have been for a couple of years. So that's what we do. That's what we do, day in, day out. Our focus is very heavily in cancer. So developing new cancer medicines and also new medicines for rare diseases, and particularly rare genetic diseases. And then finally, I would end by saying that we're really entering into a golden era in this industry. Our ability to identify the root cause of many diseases and to develop treatments that address those root causes and start thinking about cures for different types of cancers and rare diseases. It's the first time in certainly in medical history that we can start talking about cures. And so that's what certainly I find most exciting about what I do here and what we do at Veda, particularly in areas that like cancer, where a lot of people have thought it was it was a death sentence. If you asked me 20 years ago, would I be a VC? I would say no. If you asked me 20 years ago, would I be doing something where I would have a real impact on patients, and also impact on patients globally? The answer is absolutely yes. So the question for me was always, where could I get real impact on patients globally? And again, that comes from two places. The first is being raised in a family of physicians, where I could see, I was raised, in my dad's surgery. So we have two brothers, a twin brother, a younger brother. We were all raised in my dad's practice, which was at the time in the western suburbs in St. Clair, St. Mary's. And so we saw at least I saw the dedication that he had to his craft and to his patients. That made a huge impression on me. And then, frankly, my time at the University of Melbourne, where again, for the first time, I was introduced to medical research. I had some tremendous mentors like Graham Brown, Roger Short, Gus Nossel. These are, really, champions in the medical research, complex in Australia. And so they opened my eyes to this new world, and for me, what I found incredible is that you could have a big impact, which is what I was looking for, on patients through, new insights in diseases and developing new medicines for those diseases. And actually, the first company I started with Roger Short, who was a professor of reproductive endocrinology at the University of Melbourne. And he's credited with co-founding Australia's first biotech company, Circadian, in the mid-80s. And, we started a company that was focused on HIV medicines. And I was in my, mid to late 20s at the time. I didn't know any better, but that's really how I started into this journey, through, a combination of, coming from a family of physicians, and also, what I saw and what I learned, in Australia, in Melbourne. And yes, that's taken me, to the UK, to Oxford and Cambridge, and now to the US, and all these, these places that I would read about when I was young. But I've, tried to stay true to certainly what I saw as a young medical student and through the eyes of my mentors. I would say two things. There are two questions embedded there. One is around medical research, Australian medical research, and the second is around the Australian biotech industry. They're linked, and I'll start with the medical research industry. So I would say that the Australian medical research industry is as strong as it's been for a very long time, for decades. Australian medical research has been valued globally, particularly in the fields of cancer medicine, immunology, the study of viruses, virology, microbiology, for decades. And we have a number of world-class research institutes, including the Howard Florey, Walter Eliza Hall in Melbourne, the Berghofer Institute in Brisbane, and the Garvan Institute in Sydney. So truly world-class scientists, and also a history of decades of world-class publications and research, some of which has led to world-leading drugs. So the HPV vaccine, the cervical cancer vaccine, came from Ian Fraser in Queensland. One of the first drugs for Amgen, which is GM-CSF, which is for blood cancers, came from the Walter Eliza Hall and Doug Hilton. So we have this rich history of world-class medical research. When it comes to biotech, which is now the second part of the question, what we don't have is the companies we have here in the US or in Europe. We don't have the Genentechs of the world, or the Biogen IDEX of the world. These are biotech behemoths that were started 15, 20, 25 years ago, and have created a real ecosystem of translating research into the new generation of medicines for cancer or for rare genetic diseases, like gene therapies and cell therapies and these antibodies. And so Australia lacks that champion, that global champion. We're close when it comes to other areas in healthcare, like in CSL and for biomanufacturing. That's a global champion. For Cochlear and ResMed in the medical devices space, they're global champions. But when it comes to biotech and the development of therapies for cancer and genetic diseases, we don't have that. And why don't we have that is a very good question. I think historically, there are two things that drive success in biotech. One is world-class science, which we have. The second is very robust private and public capital markets, and so the reason why capital markets are important or financing is important is it's very expensive to develop these drugs. It can cost anywhere from several hundreds of millions of dollars to a few billions of dollars to develop these new medicines. And what that has required is very robust both government support and private capital support of strong venture capital industry. I should say that very few places globally have robust private capital markets and venture capital. The U.S., yes, I would even say Europe is not there. Certainly, China is getting there. It's not where the U.S. is. The U.S. is stands one step ahead of a lot of other places. So I do believe that once the right incentives are put in place to support risk, what is a very risky endeavor, developing a drug, and there's no reason why we can't get there, because we have the sophistication when it comes to capital markets around mining, which is also a very risky endeavor, to shift some of that into biomedical research, and then to get some talent, from Europe and Australia and the US back to Australia. And by talent, I mean entrepreneurial managers who've been in pharma or biotech, and that's already starting to happen. So I do believe that the future is very bright for Australia, and coincides as this industry truly globalizes. Entrepreneurship is critical to the development of new medicines because science and human biology is very risky. The reality is we enter into, as we put together teams and new companies that are looking to find a cure for cancer or find a cure for a rare disease, the actual probability or the chance that new venture succeeds is 2%, 5%, 8%, 10% maximum when we enter into it, which is really at the beginning. And so it's a very, very high risk endeavor. And part of the reason why I like it, it certainly appeals to the idealist and humanist in me, as you've heard. But these are David and Goliath, battles that we enter into, that we really are looking to win. So it also appeals to the underdog in me, which is a very Australian thing. And the way we do that is by really putting together teams of not just scientists, but scientists and physicians, entrepreneurs and financiers, so we can capture both the creativity, that's required, but also, we have to create, a path that does not exist. And so you have to see the kernel of possibility where others are really not seeing anything. And so that requires, the entrepreneurial, I would say, not just the entrepreneurial ambition, but also the entrepreneurial nous, not just to see it, but then to actually make it happen. And so that's really what we're focused on. And what I'm focused on is, not just providing capital, but we're operator entrepreneurs, here, at what we do. It's because it's not writing a check. It's about making, but for the teams that, we put together, these medicines, may not exist or would not exist. And so we have to make that happen. So I would give, really two pieces of advice. The first piece is you really have to, follow your passion, but follow it by working with the very, very best in your field, wherever that takes you. And, through that, you learn not just, the knowledge part, but you also learn what it takes to be at the very highest level. Because at least in medical research, the question is, not, necessarily being the best in the world. It's operating at that level, so you're at a stage where you can fight, human biology, human disease, that complexity, which is a level above, our knowledge, as a society. So we're always in these battles where, human disease is one step ahead, two steps ahead, even multiple steps ahead. And so we have to really put our best foot forward. And that's why, science for medical research is really a collaborative endeavor with the best and brightest minds, globally. And so the first piece of advice is to, go seek, the very best in your fields, wherever that takes you. And the second is, I would say, there are many roads that lead to Rome. So there's always the tried and tested path, and there's, the paths which are, less tried, less trodden. But I think, again, in an industry which is inherently creative, where you have to create these medicines, they wouldn't exist otherwise, you have to develop a mindset where you're seeing that kernel of possibility. And for that, you have to be flexible and open to, to opportunity, and open to the unpredictability that can be thrown at you sometimes. So those are the two pieces of advice. One is to seek out and work with the very best, and the second is to be very open-minded and look for the path less trodden. And I would say the beautiful thing about this industry is it's really that simple. Is that if you really focus on good science and really focus on what can make an impact on patients' lives, then you can create a lot of success. Oh, really? Yeah, that's wonderful. My work is it's like a vacation, for me. So the path I've gone down is an atypical path, and I did it because I'm getting a bit emotional. It means a lot. It means a lot. The way that medicines are being developed today, they're being developed by small startups, entrepreneurial startups, really globally. They're no longer being developed by the big pharmaceutical companies. More than half, if not more, of medicines out there being see their start in small biotech companies, and so that's what I focus on. And I also see that opportunity, in Australia, as this industry, comes of age, with its heritage, strong heritage in medical research, the opportunity to emerge as a, as a leader, as really a true global leader in this new industry.